The day I buried my wife, my son walked into the funeral 40 minutes late, holding up his phone to live stream and saying one single sentence that froze my heart colder than the coffin in front of me. Mom's dead and you're still this poor? The whole church turned to look at me as if I were a spare part in my own story. And in that moment, between the rain, the sound of wet clothes brushing as people shifted in their seats, and my son's sneer, I knew some humiliations don't come from strangers, but from the very people you raised. If you've ever watched a father or mother get hurt by their own family, or seen a good person pushed to the edge, leave a single period, so I know you're still here with me. Please tell me where you're listening from. Seattle, Denver, Austin, or a small town like Port Orchard. And if you believe some truths only surface when the last person standing finally decides to speak, hit follow so you don't miss what comes next. Thank you for being here. I used to think the worst day of my life would be the day Helen closed her eyes. But it wasn't. The worst day was the day I had to bury her and watch my own son turn a decent funeral into a public humiliation in front of the entire town of Port Orchard. St. Mary's Church was a small gray roof structure perched on a hill overlooking the bay. That morning a light mist fell, the smell of wet pine and cold soil in every breath. People came early, most of them Helen's old friends, women from her book club, old men she had cared for back when she worked at the nursing home. Everyone wore black or gray, spoke softly, kept the solemn tone Helen always liked. But Port Orchard is small, and the quietest things are the easiest to break. Derek and Brianna showed up when the service was already halfway through. Exactly 40 minutes late, Brianna's heels hitting the tile like she wanted everyone to know she'd arrived, while Derek walked in with his phone raised, live streaming, saying loud and clear, "Hey guys, we got stuck in traffic. Mom's funeral is already happening." I heard the murmurs behind me. I heard the pastor's voice break because of the loud door. Brianna wore a tight red dress, the kind no one wears to a funeral unless they want attention. As soon as she stepped in, she looked around like she was judging the place. Then right in the middle of the silence, she nudged Derek, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your mom's gone? And he's still this poor?" In that instant, it felt like someone sliced the air open with a sharp blade. The way people turned their heads created a wave of cold down my spine. I stood before Helen's casket, hands clasped, fighting to keep my breath steady. Derek, the boy Helen adored all his life, looked at me and scoffed. "You lived off Mom your whole life. Without her, how are you going to survive? Who's going to take care of you now?" I could have reacted. I could have said something that would have shut him up. But I didn't. Not because I was weak, but because Helen once told me, "When people want to shame you, silence is sometimes the strongest answer." So I stood there, silent, looking at the photo of Helen smiling as if she were telling me, "Stay strong." Brianna sat down like she was at a movie theater, opened her phone to replay the live stream, and snickered. Derek sighed loudly, acting like he was the one carrying the real sorrow of the day. The service went on, but the respect had been stained. I heard whispers, heard a few forced coughs, trying to swallow discomfort, and even heard the assistant pastor sigh behind the curtain. I thought I had endured enough for one morning, but when the funeral ended and guests began to leave, a thin hand rested gently on my arm. It was June Harper, Helen's closest friend for nearly 2 decades. She leaned in, her voice low enough only I could hear. "Walter, before she passed, Helen told me she had something important to tell you. Very important. I think she didn't get the chance." I froze. My throat tightened so much I couldn't even thank her. Helen never hid anything from me, but those words, "something important," rose like a ripple on water I thought had finally gone still. I wanted to ask more, but June's daughter was already guiding her to the car. I stood at the church door, hands trembling. The smell of the bay drifted in, salty cold, pushing my thoughts into deeper confusion. I was about to head home to pack Helen's things when a black SUV stopped right at the steps. The door opened. A gray-suited, silver-haired man stepped out. Elias Ward, tech billionaire, Helen's former employer, a man I thought only knew Helen as a loyal worker. He walked straight toward me, no small talk, no polite pauses. He placed a firm hand on my shoulder. "Walter," Elias said, looking directly at me, not with pity, but with something deeper. "We need to talk." I nodded softly. "About Helen, right?" Elias tightened his grip slightly, his voice dropping. "Talk, but only with you. Not Derek, no one else." I felt something shift, a door I never knew existed in 22 years with Helen, opening, and an unease, or more accurately, a warning, rose slowly in my chest. Maybe Helen really had hidden something from me, and I was about to hear it from a man outside my family, yet the only one who showed up at the final minute of her funeral. After the funeral, Elias called again and said that if I still wanted to hear everything Helen had hidden, I needed to meet him at his private home on Bainbridge. I drove from Port Orchard up to Seattle and parked near the terminal. That afternoon, the rain had stopped by the time I boarded the ferry from Seattle to Bainbridge Island. The water was gray and glass-like, barely trembling under the bow of the boat. I leaned on the railing, hands in my coat pockets, watching the wake spread behind us while my mind churned harder than any storm I had ever lived through. Helen had been gone for 3 days. I should have been at home, sorting paperwork, packing her clothes, learning how to breathe alone. Instead, I was on my way to the estate of Elias Ward, a place I never would have stepped into if he hadn't personally asked. Elias's estate sat on a gentle slope overlooking the bay, with wide glass walls, dark timber roof lines, and tall pines guarding the property. It was the kind of house you see in magazines, pristine, expensive, and belonging to another world. I stood before the large wooden door and took a deep breath before ringing the bell. The door opened almost instantly. Elias himself answered, not a house manager. He wore a deep blue V-neck sweater today, khakis, and no tie. He looked more ordinary than the tech billionaire image the news always broadcast. "Walter," he said, voice low and firm, "thank you for coming." I only nodded, not trusting, not hostile, just a tired man walking into another man's house, knowing he carried another mystery on top of my wife's funeral. His office was on the second floor at the end of the hall. When he opened the door, I saw a wide room with 2 walls of full bookshelves, a large walnut desk, and a window overlooking the dark, quiet sea. Nothing unnecessary. A computer, a few folders, and 1 framed family photo. Everything neat to the point of being unsettling. "Sit," Elias said, pointing to the leather chair across from his desk. He hadn't sat yet. He went to the lower shelf on the right wall, pulled out a worn brown leather notebook, and placed it between us on the desk. I didn't need to look closely to recognize the handwriting on the cover. That slanted H with the slight pull at the end. Helen G. My legs almost gave way for half a second. "Is that—" "Helen's journal," Elias said plainly. "She kept it locked in the HR records cabinet and asked me to hold it, on the condition that I give it to you only if one day—" He paused, inhaling softly. "If she went first." I stared at the journal as it might burst into flames. Part of me wanted to grab it, flip it open, and read every page. Another part wanted to run away, hold on to the version of Helen I knew, untouched by secrets that could break the rest of me. I opened it anyway. The smell of old paper and ink, the warmth of the years Helen had lived quietly, years I hadn't fully reached. Elias pointed to a folded corner on one page. "This one," he murmured. "She said you needed to see first." Helen's handwriting appeared, steady, slightly leaning right. "Walter, if I go before you, people may try to tell you things, push things onto you, make you feel like you only survived because of someone else. I'm writing this so you remember one thing. Protect yourself. Don't trust Derek. Don't trust our son, not when money becomes the measure of his love." It felt as if someone squeezed my ribcage with both hands. Derek. Helen was talking about Derek, our only son. Why? My voice rasped. Why would she write that? Elias sat down across from me, fingers laced. Do you remember when Derek almost got expelled in his sophomore year? I frowned. He said it was bad grades, then asked his mother to pay extra tuition to retake classes. Helen had to pull money from savings. What about it? Elias shook his head slowly. Not asked. Took. He let the words hang in the air for several seconds before continuing. You're probably wondering why the financial office flagged the unusual withdrawal, right? Let me explain exactly so you understand. He leaned forward, his voice even slower. The financial officer at the time had no authority to access your or Helen's personal accounts. But because Helen was senior staff in payroll, every paycheck, bonus, and equity payout had to pass through internal auditing before disbursement. When they cross-checked her pay stubs, they noticed several pay cycles were being automatically diverted into an irregular account, a joint account Helen held with someone else, exactly during the time Derek owed tuition. After that, for 3 straight months, Helen received late mortgage notices because her emergency funds had disappeared. I remembered those months. Helen kept saying, money's a little tight, and don't worry, I'll manage. I thought it was hospital bills for her mother in Tacoma. She didn't want you worried, Elias said, reading my thoughts. But that wasn't the only time. Derek once took the key to her safe. The image of that old metal safe in the corner of the closet flashed in my head. Helen once said she lost the key. She was upset for a week. My breath grew shallow. You're telling me Derek stole money from his own mother? Elias didn't soften it. Not telling, stating. Helen checked her records, compared dates Derek visited, and everything matched in ways you don't want it to. The room felt smaller. The ocean outside sounded farther away, drowned out by the pounding in my ears. And that, Elias said, walking to a metal filing cabinet, is only the first layer. He pulled out a black binder, set it on the desk, and turned it toward me. Helen wasn't only good at caring for people. She was brilliant with numbers. For 22 years, her salary, bonuses, employee stock from my company, she didn't spend them on herself. He opened it. In front of me were spreadsheets, investment logos, and bank statements. Every dollar, Elias said, went into a portfolio, under your name. My throat burned. My name? Walter Grayson, your birthday, your social security. Helen always said, Walter built this life with me. I want him protected, even when he thinks he has nothing worth protecting. My eyes dropped to the final figure, a long string of digits. My mind pieced them together, $4.2 million. I laughed, short, strained, trapped in my chest. No, you've got the wrong man. Elias didn't blink. Walter, I don't. This is a portfolio my company manages. Helen started small, some index funds, some employee stock when we IPO'd, then moved into passive income real estate. She didn't buy handbags, didn't take luxury trips. Everything extra, she put her here. I sagged into the leather chair. It should have felt soft. Instead, it felt like it was swallowing me. All these years, I thought I was the lesser one in our marriage. My repairman's salary barely covered bills. I thought Helen carried the rest. Savings, emergencies, everything. My wife had been working, saving, and secretly building a wall around me, and I never saw it. And my son, the one I dismissed as immature, impulsive, had been on the other side of that wall, chipping at it every chance he got. My voice cracked. Why tell me now? Elias's gaze softened a moment, though his voice stayed steady. Because Helen asked. She wanted to be sure Derek never found out. She was afraid that if he did, he'd use you. He hesitated, weighing the next part. Then they chose to say it. She'd suspected something for a while, not just about money, about her health. A cold rush went down my spine. Her health? Her heart was bad. You know that. I nodded. 6 months ago, she told me some days her heartbeat went wild. Exhaustion worse than usual. Always after Derek visited. She took her meds exactly as prescribed. but symptoms got worse. Helen didn't tell you because she didn't want to burden you, but she didn't ignore it. Elias opened a drawer and pulled out a manila envelope labeled J. Kim, Report. Helen hired a private investigator, Jonah Kim. She wanted to know if Derek was just a troubled son or something else. My throat locked. Elias, what are you implying? He didn't answer. Instead, he opened his laptop, turning it toward me. Let me plant the seed first, Walter, because what you're about to see will be harder to swallow than that 4.2 million figure. The screen lit up. A video window opened, slightly angled, clearly from a ceiling security camera in a pharmacy. Clear enough that I recognized the man in the frame, even from behind. Derek, my son, leather jacket, baseball cap, leaning on the counter, flirting with the pharmacist. Jonah had zoomed in, timestamp highlighted. Elias paused the video and looked at me, voice dropping. The footage you're seeing wasn't taken illegally. This is the front counter camera at Glendale Pharmacy, provided legally at Helen's request. Why? Because she suspected Derek had been buying heart health supplements there. She went in herself and told them she was a cardiac patient whose medication was being tampered with. The pharmacy owner, an old friend of Helen, agreed to save any clips with Derek in them. He hit play. Derek pointed at a shelf labeled Heart Health Supplements. He said something, laughed, then set 2 bottles of supplement pills on the counter. The next clip, parking lot camera. Derek walked out, opened the trunk, pulled out a prescription bottle I had seen hundreds of times on our kitchen table. Helen's heart medication. And then, right in front of me, Derek began swapping pills. Jung Jeong Revenge. Drama. Dan Cho Jok. Gia. Mai. Theo Jung. Batro Toi Ja Sak Nhan. When I left Elias's estate and drove through Bainbridge's rain-slicked roads, what settled in my chest wasn't sadness. It was numbness, the kind of numbness that comes when you're forced to face a truth you were never prepared to hear. By the time my truck turned into Maple Crest in Port Orchard, the sky was a solid sheet of black, pressed down over the neighborhood like someone had thrown a blanket across it. The light inside my house leaked through the blinds, cold, sharp, unfamiliar, not the warm golden glow Helen used to turn on every night. I opened the door and found Derek and Brianna standing in the middle of the living room, like 2 strangers breaking in, the file cabinet wide open, folders yanked out like scrap metal. Derek looked at me with that bored, irritated face he'd perfected. We're checking the paperwork to help you, Dad. Brianna, wearing rubber gloves like she was afraid of contamination, flipped through bills with a look of disgust. I don't know how Mom Helen lived so old-fashioned. I stood there, didn't react, didn't yell. Not because I was weak, but because I'd started to understand everything Helen wrote in her journal. I said quietly, I didn't ask either of you. Derek fired back instantly, voice dripping superiority. You didn't ask, but you need it. Then he kept rummaging, digging through my life, as if he were mining treasure he believed belonged to him. It was the first time in my life I looked at my son and saw a stranger. After nearly an hour of tearing the house apart, Derek stood, clapped his hands against his jeans like he'd finished some filthy job. We'll come back tomorrow to talk about your future. A light sentence, but it landed in my chest like a stone. That night, I lay awake in the dark, eyes open, unable to sleep. Then I heard the door open softly, footsteps light, but not light enough. Brianna's whisper, He's weak now. Getting him to sign the nursing home papers will be easy. Derek's voice low and hard. House first. Sell it. Once we get the money, who cares if he ends up in a facility? In that instant, the darkness in the room thickened until I could hear my heartbeat, like knuckles rapping on an empty barrel. This wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was a plan. And I, the target, was separated from them by nothing but a thin, wooden wall. Then, like an old tide pulling back, I remembered something Helen once said on a winter afternoon, stirring soup, turning with a soft smile. If the house ever gets so quiet, it scares you. Check under the kitchen floor. I'd laughed then, thinking she was joking. But tonight, in the loaded silence of this house, it didn't feel like a joke. I went to the kitchen. The microwave's blue glow washed over the counter, making everything look as cold as an operating room. I knelt and pressed my fingers under the tiles. The first 4 tiles gave nothing. But the 5th, my fingertip hit something small, cold, metal. When I pried it out, I almost dropped it. A Nokia 1280, thick with dust. So old it could only be something Helen hid long before her health declined. I powered it on. The green screen flickered alive. In the recorder folder were 3 files. Record_01, record_02, record_03. My heartbeat thudded loud enough to echo in my ears, but when I opened record_01, the screen flashed. Enter security code. I sat in the dark, the old phone warm and trembling in my palm. Helen had left 3 messages, and I couldn't open a single one yet. And the worst part wasn't what those recordings might contain. It was the reason a careful woman like Helen had felt the need to record them inside this house at all. When morning broke over Port Orchard, a thin white fog lay across the streets like cold smoke. I had barely slept. The little Nokia on my kitchen table felt heavier than any steel I'd ever lifted. A small dead phone holding 3 recordings and 1 truth Helen had left behind. I was pouring coffee when there came a knock. 3 times. Firm. The kind made by a man who knows he belongs there, not someone asking permission. When I opened the door, a man in his 60s stood there. Short, built like old pine, silver hair cut close to the scalp, eyes sharp in the way only men who've seen too much darkness can be. He spoke immediately. "You Walter?" I nodded, and his next sentence snapped something tight inside my skull. "I'm Jonah Kim." I knew the name. Not from a meeting. Elias had said it last night in that office overlooking the sound. Helen hired private investigator Jonah Kim to investigate Derek. And now the man Helen trusted most was standing at my door. Jonah showed me his PI badge, not bragging, just establishing, I'm Helen's guy, not Derek's. That alone made me step aside. We sat in the kitchen. Jonah's eyes flicked to the Nokia, and he gave a small nod, as if confirming something he'd expected. "Helen told me about that phone," he said, pulling out a chair. "She hid it a long time ago. Called it her last line of defense." My throat tightened. "You know the password?" He nodded. "She sent it to me on a slip of paper over a year ago. Wrote, 'If anything happens, the code is 1105. I asked her why that number. She smiled and said, "Our wedding day. Walter will understand." My chest twisted. I never knew Helen prepared this far ahead. Jonah picked up the Nokia, typed 1105, and with a single soft beep, all 3 files unlocked. He opened the first one, record_01, and pressed play. Helen's voice came through soft, but shaking, like she'd recorded it after crying. "Derek, if you touch my pill cabinet again, I will call the police. I don't know what you're doing, but I can feel it." The ache in my chest deepened. Jonah didn't pause. He opened record_02. This time Helen's voice was lower, closer to the mic, like she was hiding from someone outside the door. "Walter doesn't know. I have to record this, in case the thing I fear most happens. If anyone finds this phone, please tell him that I felt someone in the medicine room while I was sleeping. I heard the glass bottles clink. It wasn't Walter. I'm afraid it's Derek. I'm afraid. So afraid." I couldn't move. Helen's whisper, my wife's last attempt to protect me while protecting herself, made the kitchen feel colder than the morning fog outside. Jonah watched me, expression not pitying but clinical, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis. "She hired me because she suspected Derek was tampering with her medication," he said. "She didn't want you to know because it would break you. But she knew she might run out of time." I leaned onto the table, fingers laced to stop them from shaking. What about the other 2 files? Jonah didn't play them yet. Instead, he pulled a thin folder from his jacket. Before we continue, you need to understand something. Derek wasn't just irresponsible. He had motive. He tapped the folder. He owed the Eastwood crew $83,000. He told Brianna he'd get the money back from his parents. Helen knew. My eyes squeezed shut. The pieces clicked together in ways I never wanted them to. Jonah set the folder down. Helen didn't just suspect. She had proof, and she hoped I could get it to you, if she couldn't. Then there came a second knock. Not Derek, not Brianna. A tall woman with tied-back brown hair and a long gray coat stepped inside with a decisive stride. Jonah stood. Attorney Mariah Elwood. Helen asked me to contact her when the time came. Mariah shook my hand, eyes sharp but warm in the way of someone who knows both the law and the weight of grief. I'm here to talk about your rights, Walter, she said, opening her briefcase. Derek may try to force a power of attorney, but as long as you're competent, and you clearly are, anything signed under pressure is void. Some of the weight in my chest eased. As for your house, Mariah continued, flipping through county records, it's in your name only. No liens, no POA, no cosigners. Derek can't sell it, can't transfer it, can't touch it. Relief came, but partial, thin. Jonah nodded to me. Now we play the last file. He pressed record, _03. A few seconds of static, then a man's voice, not Derek's. Low, cold, deliberate. Tomorrow it's done. She won't be a problem anymore. The blood in my veins turned to ice. This wasn't Derek's voice. This wasn't teenage stupidity or debt desperation. This was someone else, someone close enough for Helen to fear. Jonah turned off the phone, met my eyes with heavy silence. Walter, we have a lot of work ahead of us, and it will be harder than you think. Tonight, I sat alone in the kitchen, the Nokia face down on the table like an eye that knew everything, yet stayed frighteningly silent. The 3 recordings from Helen were unlocked now, but none of them were enough to convict Derek. They were only fragments, whispers of suspicion, weak breaths, the fear Helen tried to hide. I needed real proof, solid, clear, impossible to deny, and I knew exactly where it was, the medicine cabinet. Helen once said, "If my heart ever fails, it will start from that cabinet." I opened the bedroom door, turned on the small lamp, and stepped softly like a stranger in my own house. The wooden cabinet creaked, just a tiny click, but enough to make my pulse jump. In the corner, among the vitamins and aspirin, was a bottle of heart medication, the kind Helen took every night, exactly as prescribed. I picked it up. Light. Too light. Wrong. I twisted the cap. Empty. Not a single pill. The bottle that had never run dry in 5 years, because Helen was meticulous enough to replace it early, was now hollow, suspiciously clean, like someone had dumped every pill and wiped the inside to erase fingerprints. I clenched the bottle so hard my fingers went white. A coldness slid down my spine. Helen had been right. Derek hadn't just taken money. He had crossed into a place no child should ever enter, his mother's health. I placed the bottle back exactly where it had been. I couldn't let him know I had found it. I needed Jonah to see it, test it, analyze what had been inside. But as I shut the cabinet, a noise drifted from the living room, the sound of something being shoved to the floor. Then Brianna's sharp laugh. I moved quickly. She was crouched at the trash bin, wearing pink rubber gloves like she was cleaning a dog kennel, digging through layers of my household trash, not to find keepsakes. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice so cold even I felt it. Brianna didn't look up. "Sorting Helen's old junk so we can throw it out. She kept way too much unnecessary stuff." She grabbed a handful of Helen's letters, those handwritten notes from our early years, and dropped them into a garbage bag like scraps of paper. I froze, not because of the monetary value, but because of the absolute disrespect toward a woman who had been in her grave only 3 days. Don't touch my wife's things, I said, each word dropping like stone. Brianna rolled her eyes. Your wife, but my mother-in-law. I have the right to keep the house clean. Before I could answer, the front door slammed open. Derek stepped in like a man whose debts were knocking on his spine, jacket wet from rain, face sour, eyes twitching. He looked at me, then at Brianna. Come on, Eastwood crew showed up. Who? I asked. Derek tossed his bag onto a chair and jerked his head toward the yard. My guys, I had dealings a few months ago. They want their money back. When I stepped onto the porch, my yard, the same yard where Helen planted lavender every summer, was crowded with 3 tattooed men in black hoodies leaning on a pickup truck. One stepped forward, chewing gum. Derek, that's it. 3 days now. I want the money. Derek spun toward me, irritated. Dad, you need to loan me some. I'll pay it back. This is family business. I looked at him, and for the first time in my life, saw the truth. Derek didn't see me as his father. He saw me as a vault. Just then, a curtain snapped upward next door. My neighbor, Mr. Humphrey, the man who had lived beside me and Helen for decades, watched the scene, then shook his head with disgust. He said something that cut the yard silent. After the way that boy treats you, Walter, you still let him live here? I didn't answer, not because I lacked one, because I knew if I opened my mouth, my voice would break. Derek snarled at Humphrey. This is our family matter, old man. Don't... Derek, I cut him off. Inside. My voice was low, but heavy enough that even the 3 loan sharks turned to stare. Derek shot me a look, a mix of fear, anger, and contempt, then went in. And the instant he crossed the threshold, he bent down and picked up the Nokia. It was sitting on the kitchen table where I'd left it. I meant to hide it, but got distracted by Brianna's behavior. My heart launched into my throat. He turned it over, examining it. What's this? I stepped closer, keeping my face steady. Old phone of mine, Derek smirked. Man, you still use prehistoric stuff. He tossed it back onto the table and walked away. I exhaled so long my chest hurt. If he had powered it on, if he had seen the 3 recordings, everything would have ended before I had a chance to protect anything Helen left behind. As soon as he disappeared down the hallway, the phone buzzed. One text, from Jonah. Walter, urgent. Derek just bought 2 bottles of high-dose veterinary sedatives, the kind used to knock out fast. I need to meet you immediately. My hand trembled, not from fear, from realization. What I had uncovered tonight was just the surface. The truth buried underneath this house was far more poisonous than I had ever let myself imagine. The next morning, the sun over Port Orchard rose with a pale, dying light, like a bulb about to burn out. There was no warmth left in the house, no trace of the softness Helen used to leave behind, only damp air, the sound of Derek's slippers dragging across the floor, the clatter of Brianna pulling drawers open, as if they were trying to claim every square inch of my life. But this morning, everything would change. I had Jonah, and for the first time since Helen died, I had a plan. We met in the parking lot behind my old repair shop, where Jonah said, "No cameras, nobody watching." He stood there in a thick black coat, arms crossed, his posture more like a war veteran than a civilian investigator. "Walter," Jonah said, his eyes like cold steel, "now we make them think you're weak, very weak, weak enough to be pressured into signing anything." I narrowed my eyes. "You want me to pretend to be confused?" Jonah nodded. "Derek wants to believe that. Let him believe it. A man who gets comfortable will expose his whole plan." I inhaled deeply. A moment of humiliation passed through me. I had never played the role of someone losing his mind. But then I thought of Helen. I thought of the recordings in the old Nokia. I thought of Derek switching her heart medication. I thought of the empty bottle in the cabinet. If I had to act, I would act. I asked, "What will Derek try next?" Jonah opened his bag and pulled out a newer Nokia. Small, black, no logo. This record's in all directions. 12-hour battery. No network needed. Not hackable. Clip it under your collar. I took it, the cold metal making my skin prickle. Derek is preparing a quiet kill, Jonah continued. He plans to take you to a doctor's appointment. But it's a fake doctor. One of Eastwood Crew's guys. They'll use high-dose veterinary sedatives. You'll sleep and you won't wake up. I gripped the recorder so hard my hand went numb. How do you know? Jonah said only one sentence. Helen paid me to follow him. I don't leave a job unfinished. We stood there in the cold morning air and planned every step like two men preparing for a silent war. I would act mildly confused, forget keys, repeat questions, sit down slowly, stand up shaky. Derek wanted to believe I was fading. Let him believe it, and he did. That afternoon, Brianna found me standing in the kitchen staring at the kettle without turning it on. I pretended not to remember how switches worked. "Oh my God," she sighed, turning her phone camera toward me. "Guys, look at this. He's declining. We have to step in." I turned to her and asked softly, "Was I making tea?" Her eyes lit up like a woman who just stumbled on free money. Yes. Let me do it. You rest." Derek entered minutes later, giving me one slow look from head to toe, and I saw in his eyes a feeling only killers have right before they make their move. Certainty that the victim is too weak to fight. "Dad," Derek said, his voice syrupy and fake, "tomorrow I'm taking you to a doctor. He says at your age you need neurological checkups." Jonah hadn't missed a beat. I asked like a confused old man, "A doctor? Where?" Derek smirked. "A good clinic. Friend recommended, don't worry." I nodded, letting my hand tremble. But inside my coat, the hidden recorder captured every word in that house. That night, I lay in bed but didn't sleep. I heard Derek on the phone in the living room. "Yeah, tomorrow I'll bring him. You got the stuff ready? Make it strong. Make it clean." I heard the other man's laugh, low, amused, practiced. "Bring the old man. 1 dose. Quick, tidy." I recorded all of it. Every word, every breath. Everything would be evidence. The next morning, Derek walked me to the car. I pretended to stumble so he'd have to hold me. He liked that. He wanted to see me weakening. God, he wanted me dead so he could take this house. The clinic he drove me to sat deep in the woods, an old wooden building behind an abandoned gas station. A faded sign read, "Veterinary and Urgent Care." But it was obvious the place had been shut down for years. Jonah had told me it used to be a real animal clinic, but was closed after drug violations. Eastwood Crew repurposed it as a private spot for quiet work, somewhere no one visited. To outsiders, it looked abandoned, but inside, it still had enough equipment to do dirty jobs. You think this is a real doctor's office?" I asked, letting my voice shake. Derek frowned. "Just get inside." The smell of veterinary drugs slapped me the moment we stepped in. A man in a filthy lab coat looked me up and down. "This your patient?" he asked. Derek nodded. "He's losing it. Make it fast." The man pulled a syringe from a drawer. Its label faded, but I recognized it immediately. The same high-dose animal sedative Jonah told me about last night. "Lie down," the man said, voice flat. "Just a health exam." I looked at Derek, my son, the boy I raised, the boy I cleaned when he had fever, the boy I taught to ride a bike. Now standing there with his arms crossed, face blank, like he was watching someone take out trash. "Derek," I whispered, why are you doing this?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I saw the syringe coming closer, and in that exact moment, I bolted upright. I'm not young. But I have something Derek doesn't, the reflexes of a mechanic who has dodged falling engines and flying metal his entire life, faster than anyone expects. I shoved the man hard, slammed the exam door open, and ran. He yelled. Derek screamed, "Old man, stop!" But I ran like Helen was pulling me forward, ran like if I fell, I'd never get up again. I cut across the dirt lot, around the back of the clinic, through a break in the fence. I heard Derek pounding on the wall, heard him curse, but he couldn't catch me through the trails I knew like the back of my hand from fixing farm equipment all over this area. I escaped. I lived. I made it home just as the sky turned gray. My heart was pounding, but my mind had never been clearer. I opened the door and froze. Brianna was standing in the middle of the living room, lights on, phone raised in live stream, face caked with makeup, voice sweet like artificial sugar. "Hey guys, tomorrow my father-in-law is going into a nursing home. It's finally time to do the right thing." I stared at her, and I understood. Tonight wasn't the night I died, but it would absolutely be the last night they ever spent a peaceful minute in my life again. That afternoon, before the sun even touched the pine tops on the hill, there was already noise outside my house. Car doors, whispering, kids running around. Rumors travel in Port Orchard faster than fire through dry grass. Walter's selling his house. Heard he's gone senile. The son and daughter-in-law are putting him in a nursing home so they can sell the place. It didn't even take 2 hours for the whole neighborhood to gather on my lawn like they were watching a public auction. Brianna loved it. She stood in the middle of the yard like the lead actress in a cheap play. Heavy makeup, tight dress, phone in hand, waving it like a scepter. And beside her, 2 potential buyers. A young couple from Tacoma, dressed like they were shopping for a discounted luxury item. Brianna smirked, turned to them and spoke loud enough for every soul on the block to hear, "Walter's gone. Not all there anymore. This house will be sold by next week. Whoever drops cash fast gets the best deal." The yard fell silent for a single beat. Then the whispers erupted. A woman muttered, loud enough to be heard by all, "Is she really selling her father-in-law's house right in front of him?" I stood behind the door, watching everything. I wished Helen were here to see how calm I was. I remembered Jonah's words, "Let them stain themselves. You only strike at the right moment." I opened the door. Head snapped around. Brianna instantly switched to fake pity. "Dad, what are you doing out here? Go inside. You're frail." I didn't answer. I walked straight to the outdoor speaker, the one Derek installed for his drinking buddies. I turned on the mic. The entire yard went dead silent, like someone had shut off the wind. My voice came out steady, not shaking, not weak, not confused, not slow. "I hear someone's trying to sell my house." A wave of murmurs rolled out. Brianna froze. I pulled a stack of papers from my jacket, papers attorney Mariah Elwood prepared yesterday. I lifted them up, adjusted the mic, and spoke clearly. "This is the county record. It states, legal owner, Walter Grayson." I flipped to the second page. "And here, no power of attorney has ever been signed. No one can sell, sign, or decide anything on my behalf." One of the buyers raised his phone to record, probably to cover himself. But a teen nearby shouted, "Oh my God, this needs to go on TikTok. Real Port Orchard drama." I didn't stop him. The more it spread, the worse Derek and Brianna would look. Brianna flushed red, lunged to grab the mic, but I stepped back. She screamed, "You old man! What are you doing? People are misunderstanding." An older neighbor woman crossed her arms and yelled, "Misunderstanding what? You said he was senile, but he looks sharper than you. You're the one not thinking straight." The whole yard broke into laughter. Brianna's face drained like fallen powder. I looked at her, my voice low but echoing through the speaker. "Last I checked, I'm the one living in this house, not you." The buyers exchanged uneasy looks. One man stepped back. "Sorry, we don't want to be involved in whatever this family situation is." They turned and left. Brianna stood in the yard like someone stripped naked in the marketplace. And right then, the rumble of an engine shook the street. A gray pickup screeched to a stop at my gate. Derek jumped out, face red, eyes wild like an animal cornered. He took in the scene. The buyers leaving, neighbors recording, Brianna frozen. "Me holding the mic and the legal documents," Derek snapped. He lunged forward and slapped Brianna across the face in front of 30 people. The slap cracked like a firework. Brianna grabbed her cheek, screaming. Neighbors gasped. Someone recorded a close-up of the hit. Derek roared, voice hoarse and full of venom. "Tonight! I'm handling you myself. This ends tonight." The yard exploded with shocked whispers. A woman hissed, "My God! He sounds like he's threatening him." Derek didn't look at anyone now, didn't care who was filming. He stormed straight inside the house, shoulder slamming the door so hard it smashed the wall, making everyone jump. Brianna backed away, shaking. The buyers hurried out the gate. Neighbors stood packed around like ants, but no one dared step forward. I stood there, county record papers still in my hand, a cold line running down my spine. Derek was inside my house, preparing for tonight. While I stood among dozens of people, feeling more alone than ever, I knew he wasn't bluffing, and the door that slammed behind him was the sound of the countdown beginning. Night over Port Orchard Bay has a very particular smell. Rain hitting old wood, seaweed dragged up from the shoreline by the wind, and that wet cold that feels like invisible fingers brushing the back of your neck. But tonight, everything feels heavier, as if the sky itself knows what's about to happen inside this small house at the end of the hill. Rain hammered the metal roof in waves. Wind whipped against the windows, and through that thick darkness, I heard Derek's footsteps pacing the hallway. Slow, heavy, deliberate. I sat in my wooden chair in the bedroom, the new recorder Jonah gave me, hidden beneath my collar. Jonah had taught me how to switch the device into record mode. Just one soft tap. Everything was ready. Except one thing. I didn't know how far Derek would go tonight. Then the metallic click sounded outside the door. Not the doorknob, not a key. The sound of loading around. The door flew open. Derek stood in the yellow hallway light, hoodie soaked through, hair plastered down with rain, and in his hand, a battered Remington hunting shotgun, the kind duck hunters around here use. He didn't point it at my head. He pointed it at my legs like he wanted to make sure I understood that one wrong move, and he'd pull the trigger. "Sit still, Dad," he said, his voice rough but smooth, like he'd rehearsed all night. I looked straight at him. No shaking, no backing up. But my heartbeat slowed so much I felt each beat as if it were a stone dropping. Derek dragged a chair over, tossed a stack of papers onto the table. Papers I'd seen at Mariah's office, power of attorney forms. But this set, these were fake. "Sign it," Derek said. I didn't move. "You've done enough, Dad," he snapped. "You made the whole neighborhood think we're monsters. You ruined the house sale. So sign. Let us take care of you. You can't take care of yourself anymore." I watched him for a few seconds, then lowered my shoulders, pretending to be tired. But before he could shove the papers closer, I asked the one question Jonah told me to save for the perfect second. "Derek, did you make your mother die for money?" The entire room froze. Derek straightened, the shotgun dropping a little, his eyes going wide, not the reaction of an innocent man. What did you just say?" I lifted my head, my voice soft as wind. "Helen, your mother. She said her heart got worse every time you visited." The bottle in the medicine cabinet was empty. "And there's video of you switching the pills." Derek's grip tightened on the shotgun so hard his knuckles blanched. He stepped closer, floorboards squealing under his boots. "Who told you? Who the hell told you? Did you make your mother die? For money?" This time I spoke slowly, clearly, each word slicing through the room like a blade. Derek exploded. "Her or you? She did it to herself," he screamed, his voice breaking apart. "I just switched the pills to weaken her so you wouldn't spend money so we could get this house. I didn't think she'd die that fast." That was when I heard the faint click beneath my chair, the recorder capturing every word, every breath, every gust of wind slipping through the window as Derek's confession tore across the room like a knife cutting through the night. I whispered, "Helen didn't deserve that." Derek slammed the shotgun stock against the floor, shouting, "You think I wanted that? You think I wanted to kill her? She always chose you, always protected you. Without you, I'd be rich already. I raised the shotgun, only seconds left. I looked directly at him. A few hours earlier, Jonah had hidden a tiny transmitter under my chair, linked straight to the Kitsap County Sheriff's radio. He'd told me, if Derek grabs a gun or tries to force a signature, they'll hear everything. And now, as Derek screamed and slammed the gun, I heard the faint static of a police radio beneath the bed. Then, blue and red lights swept across the window. Before Derek could turn, the outside speaker boomed through the storm like thunder. Derek Grayson, drop the weapon. Drop it now. This is the Kitsap County Sheriff's Office. Flashlights cut through the glass. Boots pounded across the porch. Gun bolts racked. Derek spun around, panicked, frozen. The door blasted open. Thud! I sat still, rain still hammering the roof like 100 hands pounding to get in. In that moment, I knew the confession was recorded, and justice had arrived in the very last second. The Kitsap County Sheriff's Station at midnight always has a particular kind of air. Stale coffee, freshly printed paper, and that cold white fluorescent glow that forces every corner to show a truth no one really wants to face. When Derek was brought in cuffed, he still had enough arrogance left in him to smirk at everyone in the room, as if he hadn't just pointed a hunting shotgun at his own father, as if he hadn't confessed to swapping out his mother's heart medication until it killed her. He looked at me through the interrogation room glass, curled his lip, and said, "You think this scares me? I've got a lawyer. I'll be out soon." I didn't answer. I just looked at him the way a man looks at a shadow, one that had been stretching over Helen day after day until now, when I finally saw the source of it. Detective Lockwood walked in then. Tall, broad-shouldered, gray hair, eyes sharp as ceramic blades, the kind of man a liar only needs to look at once before wanting to confess. He set a large speaker on the metal table, then sat across from Derek. No greeting, no small talk, no easing in. "Derek Grayson," Lockwood said, voice low and steady, "we're going to listen to a few things." Derek scoffed. "I want my lawyer." Lockwood replied calmly, "He's on his way, but you'll want to hear this first." He pressed play. The room vibrated faintly. Then the sound of rain hitting the metal roof filled the speaker, the exact moment before Derek walked into my bedroom with a shotgun. Derek's voice exploded through the speaker, loud enough that officers outside stopped walking and stared into the room. "You think I did this for fun? Mom always picked you. I only switched her pills so she'd get weaker and you'd stop spending money. I didn't think she'd die that fast." No one in the room moved. I watched Derek's face drain of color in an instant. His lips trembled. His hands twitched. Lockwood didn't pause. He switched to the next. Recording. Helen's voice played through the old Nokia, faint but clear, the voice of a woman who knew someone was tampering with the thing that kept her alive. "Derek, if you touch my medicine cabinet again, I'll call the police. I don't know what you're doing, but I can feel it." Derek slammed the table. "That's edited. Who let you use—" Lockwood cut him off by playing Record 03, a man's voice, not Derek's, colder, lower, calculated, a partner, a witness, a man who knew Helen wouldn't live long. "Tomorrow it's done. She won't be a problem anymore." You could hear Derek swallow from across the glass. Then the door swung open. Brianna was led to a chair by 2 officers, shaking like a dead leaf. She heard the final recording, and before anyone could stop her, she screamed, "No, no, you told me it was just supplements. You said your mom was weak already." Derek spun on her, hissing, "Shut up! You don't know anything!" Brianna sobbed, mascara streaming down both cheeks, then stood up abruptly and pointed at him, right in front of every officer, in front of the surveillance camera, in front of the one-way glass where I stood watching. "You killed your mother. You're the one who did it. I'm not going to prison for you." Her scream hit the room like a hammer sealing a coffin. Officers exchanged looks, some shaking their heads. Lockwood folded his arms. "Thank you, Brianna. Your statement is noted." Derek lurched to his feet, shouting, "She's lying. I didn't kill my mom. Lockwood slammed his hand on the table. You just weakened her on purpose. That's your own voice, your own words. And now there's something else. He opened his case file and pulled out a photograph. The Eastwood crew standing outside my house, the same night Derek called them. Financial Crimes just sent this over, Lockwood said, voice dropping. Eastwood crew is under investigation for loan sharking, violent debt collection, and asset coercion. He slid the photo toward Derek, the overhead lights glinting off the glossy print. And thanks to your little phone call, come get the money, my old man will give it to you. You're now tied to aiding a violent debt collection group. That's a felony, Derek. Derek went completely pale. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Brianna covered her face, sobbing, while officers stared at Derek like a man who had dug his own grave and then jumped in. Lockwood stood and shut off the speaker. The interview is over. Everything you said and everything you screamed tonight goes to the prosecutor in the morning. I looked at Derek through the thick glass. I didn't see the defiant sun anymore. I saw a small man hunched in a cold white room, finally realizing everything had slipped out of his hands. And for the first time since Helen died, I felt justice take its first real steps. But I also knew this was only the surface. Beneath it was everything Helen had been trying to warn me about before she left. My phone buzzed. Jonah's message. Walter, I reviewed Eastwood Crew's gate camera. The FBI is stepping in. Derek isn't just facing attempted murder and the killing of Helen. He's tied to something much bigger. The Kitsap County Superior Court has a very particular smell. Polished pine wood mixed with the scent of old paper files. The kind of smell anyone who has lived through a family tragedy never forgets. That morning, the sky over Port Orchard was gray, but inside me there was a strange calm. Not because I was strong, but because everything Helen left behind, every warning, every secret she hid to protect me, had now become evidence no one could deny. Derek was led into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit meant for violent offenders, wrists cuffed at his waist, face drained and hollow. But I didn't look at him. I decided the night he pointed a hunting gun at me that my eyes no longer belonged to him. I sat upright in the second row beside attorney Mariah Elwood and investigator Jonah Kim. Across from us was the prosecutor's table, stacked with files so high they stood like a wall between Derek and any chance he had left. The grand jury took exactly 39 minutes to reach their decision. A number people whispered was, "So fast, it's chilling." The prosecutor stood, looked across the entire courtroom, and read every word clearly. There is sufficient evidence to indict Derek Grayson on the charge of murder in the first degree. A wave of murmurs spread like ripples across a lake. Derek lowered his head, shoulders shaking, but he didn't dare look at me. I stayed silent. Not victory, not joy, not revenge. Just the truth, finally standing on its own legs. Brianna was brought in next to hear the statement regarding her plea deal. She wore a light gray jail shirt, hair tied back, eyes swollen like someone who had cried the entire night. When the judge asked if she accepted the plea deal, Brianna's voice shook but remained clear. Yes, I plead guilty to accessory after the fact and elder abuse. The courtroom went silent. Not from shock, but because someone in Derek's orbit was finally taking responsibility. She turned her head toward me, eyes full of guilt, but no longer full of hatred. I only nodded. Not forgiveness, not resentment. That part no longer belonged to me. Then attorney Mariah Elwood rose. She handed the judge the file Helen had left behind. Her voice was steady, sharp, and precise, like a scalpel slicing through every shadow Derek ever tried to hide. The dignity of Mrs. Helen Grayson has been violated. Her assets were misused. Today, on behalf of my client, I request that the court restore all of Mrs. Grayson's property to her sole legal heir, Walter Grayson. The prosecutor nodded. No one objected. No one dared. The judge signed the order in less than 10 seconds. The savings, accounts, investment accounts, retirement funds, and all other assets belonging to Mrs. Helen Grayson are to be transferred in full to Mr. Walter Grayson. I didn't blink, not because I felt nothing, but because at that moment I remembered every page of Helen's journal, every letter she wrote as her heart weakened, every line of ink that trembled with fear, with love, with the effort to protect me until her last breath. When the hearing ended and people began to rise, I remained seated, hands resting on my knees, staring at the tiled floor Helen once walked over when she worked as a nurse caring for the elderly. Jonah placed a hand on my shoulder. "Walter, there's one more thing." He opened his bag and took out a small wooden box, the kind Helen used to keep keepsakes. Jonah lifted the lid gently. Inside was the teardrop necklace Helen wore through her middle age, the one thing she never let anyone touch, not even me. Jonah spoke softly, as if sound itself might break the moment. "Helen told me to give this to you, if she couldn't be here." I picked up the necklace, cold, light, and heavier than any sentence the court had just delivered. Under the courtroom lights, the small teardrop stone reflected a pale blue, same color as Port Orchard Bay, the color Helen once said was like my eyes when I was young. I closed my hand around it. No tears, no collapse. Just the understanding that Helen had seen farther than any of us, and she had prepared everything so I wouldn't be left unprotected, even when she knew she wouldn't be here. "For the defendant, Derek Grayson," the judge said, voice firm and cold, "the court sentences you to life without the possibility of parole, life imprisonment without parole. Charge, murder in the first degree." Derek collapsed into his chair, the color draining from his eyes. "For the defendant, Brianna Grayson," the judge continued, "the court sentences you to 7 years of incarceration, 5 years for accessory after the fact, and 2 years for elder abuse." Brianna broke down crying. No one moved. As I rose to leave the courtroom, one truth settled into me more clearly than ever. Justice isn't only about making the guilty pay. Justice is also about returning what belongs to the one who's gone, exactly the way they wanted it. There are mornings when the sunlight over Port Orchard Bay doesn't just hit the water. It slips into the cracks inside an old man like me, sealing them with a kind of light only time and loss can make. 6 weeks after the trial, I went back to my old dock. The wooden boat Helen and I once painted together was still there, its faded coat peeling in long strips, but the frame was solid, just like the love she carried for me through 40 years. I started fixing it, not rushing, not wanting to finish fast. Every cut of the chisel, every scrape of sandpaper, every new grain of wood that appeared felt like Helen was still here, in every small thing she once touched. Life began to take a new shape. I took in a few kids from the community center, orphans, kids with no family, no one to teach them how to cut wood, tie knots, or simply be listened to. I set up a small workshop in the backyard, right where Helen used to grow lavender. They call me Old Man Walter, and I don't mind. At my age, being needed is its own kind of resurrection. The Helen Grayson Foundation was born on a rainy afternoon, the kind Helen liked best when she'd make tea, turn on her desk lamp, and review patient files. I built the foundation exactly the way Jonah suggested, to help elderly people suffering from financial abuse, neglect, or coercion by their children. Every case file arriving at the foundation is a life that looks like mine, or like Helen's, and every time I sign off on help, I feel like I'm returning a piece of justice on her behalf. One evening, I received a letter, a gray envelope stamped from Tacoma Correction Center. Sender, Brianna Grayson. I opened it. Her handwriting trembled but was clear. "Walter, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I want you to know one thing. Helen didn't deserve what happened to her. I was blind, and I was wrong. I'm sorry." I read the letter 3 times, not angry, not spiteful, just feeling a long old door inside me close quietly. But another door still stood open, the one I knew I had to walk through before this circle could fully close. That's why on a May morning I sat in the cold metal chair of the Kitsap Jail visitation room. Derek was brought out, hair longer, beard uneven, eyes sunken. He avoided looking at me. I placed a thin sheet of paper on the table between us, a $1 bill. The old kind, edges wrinkled, the one Helen kept in her wallet. I said, "Your mother said, we're supposed to leave you exactly $1, no more, no less." Derek looked up. His eyes were red, full of water he wouldn't let fall. I continued, "This is your share, and it's also where everything ends." Derek reached out, but before he could touch the bill, his hand shook so hard it nearly collapsed onto the table. He couldn't say a single word. No apology, no explanation, no excuses. Just sat there, folded in on himself like someone whose air had run out. I stood up, didn't linger, didn't look back. Some goodbyes have to happen when both people are fully awake. Some lessons can only be learned inside 4 cold walls. When the visitation door shut behind me, I knew one thing. I had done my part, for Helen, for myself, and for the son. Helen tried to save, but who sank too deep to reach. On the way home, the wind off the bay blew hard, carrying the familiar salt smell. I looked down at the $1 bill, still left in my wallet. Helen's bill, the bill that marked the final boundary she and I needed to draw. My life had been covered by my son's shadow for far too long. That day, for the first time in many years, I felt the light fall back onto me. The final morning of this journey had no more screaming, no more chaos. Only a thin veil of mist drifting across Port Orchard Bay. The same mist Helen always said, "Looks like a bride's veil on her wedding day." I stood on the old wooden boat I had spent the last 3 months repairing. It wasn't new anymore, not bright anymore, but every panel of wood was something Helen once touched. Her urn sat at the bow, small, compact, and so light it hurt deep in my chest. I pulled the choke. The engine hummed alive. The boat cut through the water, leaving silver trails behind under the early sunlight. Seagulls cried overhead. In the distance were the rooftops of Port Orchard, the place where everything began, where every hurt once fell onto an old man who never knew how much his wife had carried alone. When the boat reached the middle of the bay, the wind shifted. I killed the engine. Only the sound of waves remained. I turned on the old radio, the one Helen kept in the kitchen and played every weekend morning. It hissed a little, static rising like memories surfacing from somewhere far away. Then a familiar song played, Helen's favorite, the one she hummed softly whenever she worked in the garden. "Somewhere over the rainbow?" The old voice from the radio blended with the waves like someone whispering from another world. I opened the urn. Helen's ashes were light as mist. The wind carried them gently, without pain, as if she was finally leaving behind every burden life had forced her to carry. I whispered, "Go on, Helen. This time, no one will scare you again." I stood there for a long time, watching her ashes fade into the pale green water of the bay. Then I reached into my coat pocket and took out the last thing Helen had left for me through Jonah, the teardrop necklace. The small stone caught the sun like a frozen drop of the sea. I held it tight, feeling every year of our life together settle into my palm. Her long hospital shifts, our fights over Derek's tuition, the quiet evenings we sat by the window, looking at the bay without needing to speak. All the things I never understood until she was gone. I kissed the stone and let the necklace fall into the water. It sank fast, as if the sea had been waiting for it. I breathed in. The wind smelled of salt, damp wood, and something that felt very much like freedom. And I said, not to Helen, but to myself, "People say the sea is salty because it keeps the tears of those who have no one left. But today I know I wasn't left behind. I was set free." The boat turned gently with the current. I closed my eyes. My story with Helen finally closing exactly the way she wanted. And as the boat drifted back toward shore, I realized something I had avoided my entire life. Some losses can't be healed, but some losses open a path we never dared step into. Helen is gone, but she left something in me stronger than grief, a peace she spent her whole life trying to find. I didn't win, and I didn't get revenge. I simply let go at the right moment, and left the rest for the sea to carry away. That was enough. If this story made you pause for a moment, even just a moment, to think of the person who protected you your whole life, leave it. I want to know you're still here. If you've ever seen injustice inside your own family, ever stayed silent because you didn't know what to say, or ever stood alone in a house your own loved ones turned into a battlefield, tell me what city you're listening from. Sometimes knowing someone out there understands is enough to warm a day. And if you want to stay with me through more stories about justice, truth, and the parents who only find their voice at the end of their lives, hit follow. No pressure, just so we can meet again in the next story. Thank you for staying until the end. I'll see you in the next telling.